And then our guest of honor today, Packy McCormick, who, of course, is the writer behind Not Boring. He is the ultimate king of the great online game now, which he's going to talk about. He has now, I think, 65,000 email subscribers, just unbelievable growth, unbelievable dedication and persistence. And somebody who has just, it's been amazing. He sent his very first email and sent his very first article about Ben Thompson during Rite of Passage. And now fast forward to today, and here we are, hundreds of people from around the world with him talking about what he's learned. Packy, congratulations on everything you've done. Welcome. It's really great to have you, man.
It's great to be here. This is absolutely wild to see so many people here. Thank you all for giving me and us part of your day. Hopefully we'll make this fun. Should I get kicked off with the presentation?
Yes, please.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully nothing embarrassing pops up. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Great. All right, let me present and we will get going. All right, so this workshop would not be complete without a not boring pun. So how to write not boring is what we're calling today's session. Well, let's get started. So the first thing that I want to kind of just set the stage with is that it was never obvious to me that writing was going to be anything more than a way to just exercise my brain, organize what I was reading, keep in touch with friends. Like, I did not plan for Not Boring to get big. And I think that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind as you're going through this. I know that if I were sitting here and when I first kind of heard of Rite of Passage, I was like, this is cool, but like, I'll get what, 100 subscribers if I do this. Like, there are famous people out there who are good writers and popular and whatever, and they're a special type of person. And then there's me. So to set the context, me at the time, I grew up outside of Philadelphia. I went to Duke, studied econ, did finance. In finance, got kicked into a group called Public Finance after Bank of America and Merrill Lynch merged, which is not exactly what I wanted to do, but was a good learning experience. I actually was getting ready to go back to school, to go to business school in 2013. I had my deposit down, bags packed, ready to go. And then I found a company on AngelList called Breather. And so I decided to not go to business school and spend 4 months interviewing for this one company, didn't apply anywhere else, and ended up getting this job as the first US employee at Breather. So my first year there, I was the only person in the US. I was going out and signing leases. We acquired office space and turned them into little meeting rooms that you could unlock with your phone. So I was doing that. I was cleaning spaces. I was running around. I had no time for writing, no time for anything other than work 24/7. We were open 7 days a week, which meant as the only person, I was working 7 days a week. Fast forward kind of 4 years in, Breather wasn't doing particularly hot. We expanded too fast. We had way too many spaces on the platform. Margins were bad, whatever. And so me and one other person on the team decided to try to fix it. And we were like, all right, cool. We have all of the supply. We only rent for a few hours at a time. What do we do? And so kind of over Christmas break, we locked ourselves in rooms together. Luckily, we had Breather spaces that weren't being used all over the city, which was the problem, and came up with a plan and then tried to convince the company of the plan. And to do that, we wrote this like very long doc with numbers and graphs and charts and plans and all this stuff detailing what Breather should do to save itself. And we had negative margins, and we were trying to obviously make this a positive margin business that could still grow. And so we came up with this plan to start renting our spaces out monthly, which it sounds like WeWork now. At the time was at least a little bit innovative and worked with what we were doing. Also controversial in the company because we were small spaces, short meeting times. That was like exactly what we did. And so we had to convince the company. We convinced the company using kind of this document that the two of us wrote. So I was like, all right, this writing thing, there's something here, something to it. Did it, turned around the company, negative 25% margins, positive 25% margins. Like, it worked, and I was kind of hooked on writing. So I really got into strategy, started reading a lot more Ben Thompson, started writing more internal memos, and the company was doing better and better and better. However, we let go of our CEO at one point, and brought in a professional CEO at some point after I was running the company for a few months. And as soon as that happened, like strategic thinking and writing were no longer at a premium. They were discouraged. It was just like a shitty environment to be in, frankly. And so like, that's when I knew that I needed to start thinking about one, getting out, which I was too much of a wimp to do immediately. I managed a 150-person team. I didn't want to abandon them, all of that. And so two, knew that I needed to kind of exercise my brain in another way because I'd gotten hooked on writing internally, at least. And so that's when I saw this tweet from David, who, again, at the time was like this foreign internet celebrity. I think he probably had like 20,000 followers or something at the time, foreign internet celebrity. And I was like, all right, cool. This sounds actually like maybe weird. I don't know, but it sounds like something that's at least like worth a shot to try writing online. Incredibly scary, but I'll sign up for the course. I have a learning and development budget. I think Breather gave us $2,000 a year. So I had a learning and development budget that I used towards the course and signed up. So took the course, showed up. The first thing that we did was we had to write an essay. And David's tip here was like, to start, like, don't think about coming up with something totally new. Just find the people that you respect the most out there and summarize their work. Like, there's a bunch of really dense, good content on the internet. There's some value in just being able to summarize the kind of great ideas that other people have put out there. So the first post that I did, there's a draft on the left-hand side, and the actual post on the right-hand side was called The Best of Ben. And it was kind of my personal experience, kind of reading Ben Thompson and then trying to figure out what Breather's strategy should be. I remember posting that, thinking it was garbage. Like, I think that everything that I write is garbage. And then we came to the next session and David called it out as like the best thing that had been written that week, which was like this very little thing that I'm sure he forgot about. But to me, it was like, oh, wow, like maybe I could write. Like, there's 50 or so people in this class, and he said this was the best thing. Like, maybe I should keep writing. And so I think that that one little piece of encouragement got me to kind of stick with it, which has been by far the most important thing, is just showing up and writing every week. But yeah, I've been started out with just like, Ben Thompson, he'll come up again and again, I think, in this story. Fast forward, that was just kind of like to my packym.com blog that had 0 readers. I think probably like 3 people outside of the Rite of Passage course actually read that. We had to sign up. We had to sign up for Substack, start a newsletter, and get 20 people to sign up, which again at the time seemed like absolutely impossible. I hate asking people for favors. All of this is like petrifying to me to have to do this. So I sent out this tweet, and I had, I think, 300 followers at the time. I think most of these likes have actually probably come since. That initial tweet probably had like 7 likes, but I think I got like 25 people to subscribe to this newsletter. It's now called Ethel's newsletter because I changed it from packym.substack.com to notboring.co. And somebody named Ethel tried to sell products using my old Substack. So hopefully she sold some, but that was where it started. I called the email per my last email. It was very different than what Not Boring is today. So like, here it is on the right-hand side here, the first newsletter that I ever sent. The first thing that I highlighted was that Pooja's parents signed up for the newsletter. That was a big win for me. It was like very personal. I put a personal update up front, a picture of Pooja and I, maybe actually wearing the same shirt that I'm wearing today. I need to expand my wardrobe. That was not intentional. It was a week of the Game of Thrones finale, so I put a link to that. And then I linked to an interactive course I'd made on the Sixers process. I was just like kind of experimenting, thinking about like, maybe there's something that you can do to create online courses that remix the content that's out there. So I have this Medium post with a bunch of embeds that kind of works into a course. I think 100 people did it. So that was actually pretty good. And another little piece of encouragement. But yeah, for a year, per my last email, was just me kind of reading things, finding links, summarizing them, putting them out there. I was petrified every week of sending the thing. I thought that my friends were going to think that I was an idiot for writing a newsletter and that I had nothing to add. Like, legitimately thought that the whole time, and was petrified most of the time that I hit send. Fast forward, I left Breather at the end of 2019. I was thinking about starting something called the Not Boring Club, which was going to be an in-person thing that was kind of a mix of Soho House and college extracurriculars. I had a debate club going on the side, thought it would be a lot of fun. In retrospect, probably would have been a really bad business and a slog to get off the ground, but it gave me the name Not Boring at least. But when COVID hit, I'd been doing welcome dinners. We were letting the initial members into the group. And then they started getting canceled. I was like, I don't think we should be doing 12-person group dinners in the middle of this thing. It seems like there might be something here. So I was like, damn, all right. So I moved the community online. I realized that I did not like being an online community manager. It's a really, really hard job. And again, like it requires a lot of one-on-one sales, which I'm petrified of. So I was like, all right, what do I do next? All I have is this newsletter that at the time I think had, 400 people on it. It's like, I'm just going to change the name of this thing to Not Boring. Like maybe I'll merge it with the club. Maybe it'll be its own thing. I have no idea. Changed the name, like announced that the next one was going to be Not Boring. And then that week I got COVID. So the first Not Boring newsletter I ever sent was me kind of writing like while I was dying on the couch and like sleeping and sweating, whatever, like just trying to get this thing out. It ended up being late, but got that one out. I don't think I've missed a week for illness since then, which is good. So the thing that I was focused on early on, and maybe I probably put these, early on, I think like the big shift from kind of where I was with Per My Last Email to Not Boring was that I started writing essays. And so instead of doing Links and Listen, I started writing essays. I was worried about this transition too, because I was like, look, Ben Thompson is out there. He writes about the thing that I'm most interested in, which is tech strategy. And I'm never going to do that as well as he does. And so like, what's the point? So I wrote about all sorts of stuff. I wrote about community. I wrote about sleep. I would find some interesting like scientific papers and write about those. And it was really, really all over the place. When it was all I was doing, I was like, if I'm going to do this every week and write a full essay every week, I'm just going to start writing about the things that I'm interested in. And instead of trying to change the subject, I'll change the tone of voice. And so I think that's like a little tip, is that even if someone writes about your subject, they probably don't write about it in the same way that you would if you kind of let your own personality come out there. So in the beginning, what I was really, really focused on when this was my only job, it paid me $0. There were no advertisers in sight. There were 1,000, I think, people a few weeks in signed up to the thing. Really focused on growth. One growth hack that worked is launching on Product Hunt. So we got ready, read all of the how to launch on Product Hunt guide, made a landing page because you need something new to be able to launch on Product Hunt. And because I had this 1,000-person newsletter, as soon as we launched, I was able to hit send and say like, hey, everybody, I don't think you're allowed to ask people to like it on Product Hunt, but like go check out this Product Hunt. And for whatever reason, it took off and just kind of gained this momentum and ended up in number 2 product of the day, which I think doubled the amount of subscribers that I had from 1,500 or so to about 3,000. That was like the big moment where I was like, oh my God, I might actually be able to like do this. And so begged my wife to let me kind of keep doing it and not get a job and all of that. So 3 things that I learned from Rite of Passage that I took into writing Not Boring. 1 is finding your personal monopoly. And so this was a long and winding road for me. The personal monopoly is this idea that, and David can correct me if I'm not getting it exactly right, but my interpretation of it is you're interested in a weird set and a weird intersection of different things, the intersection of which is actually probably unique. So if you're interested in tech strategy and the Cleveland Indians and math, like there's probably some intersection of those 3 things that can get you your initial niche audience. For me, I was like racking my brain for a year. As I was taking the course, I was like, I think this personal monopoly thing is kind of BS. Like I have no idea what mine is. I must not be that interesting because there are no things that I uniquely like. And so it was, I have this cute winding road graphic because it was a long and winding road to figure out kind of what that personal monopoly was. And what it ended up being was not changing, as I mentioned, what the topic that I was writing about, but changing how I wrote about it. And so I have the Mickey Mouse Club here because the first piece that I think really broke through for me there was a piece that I wrote on creative destruction, like this economic concept, but using the Mickey Mouse Club as the example. And so I was like, all right, so maybe there's something here with kind of the intersection of pop culture and strategy and economics and finance. And so I was starting to kind of build my personal monopoly. But the takeaway here is like, it was not easy, and you should like really just kind of write and figure out what interests you the most, because that the most important thing is going to be continuing to show up.
One of the things when it comes to personal monopolies that I think is really worth considering at least from Packy's story and that you'll see over and over, is one of the places where people go wrong when it comes to building their personal monopoly is they try to basically be these like big top-down architects where they'll say, this is going to be my personal monopoly. It's going to be a combination of this thing and that thing and this thing over here. It's like, and then through these three intersections, I'm going to look at like the total addressable market, and then we're going to figure it out from there. And they're very top-down, sort of rationally driven. But I think that what stands out about Packy's is how organic it was, how emergent it was. And I've found a direct correlation between how organic the growth and development of a personal monopoly is and how sustainable and differentiated that personal monopoly ends up becoming. When I first met Packy, the very first time, I have a photo right here. So Packy and I, we went to Union Square in New York, and we went to, I don't know why we went to this place. I think it was because we had lunch in Union Square at this like decently like cool outside restaurant. We're sitting outside talking, and then we're like, oh, we're gonna go work. And Kellogg's had a pop-up. And so Packy and I were like, oh yeah, that sounds great. Let's go get some cereal. And then we played this game where like you could see sort of behind me, you sort of like throw this little circle and it has to land on the hook. Remember that, Packy?
I do.
So when we were there, when we were having that conversation, Packy had no idea that this is what things were going to become in terms of the fun and the humor that he brings to his writing. He basically sat me down and said, hey, I'm thinking of building this in-person club. It's going to be kind of like Soho House, but it's going to be a little bit more like intellectual and stuff. I'm like, yeah, it's like a decent idea, but like, I like this guy. Would be a little bit more supportive than like, I'm not sure that's a great idea. But like, the point is not that I knew what was right. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. It's that Packy just kind of kept on going and really paid attention both to sort of this combination of what is fun for me, what is appealing to my audience, and in the intersection of those two things, let's just double down on that. And so as you listen to Packy's story, listen to all the things that didn't work, but then also listen to how deliberate Packy was about sort of flowing with the universe and basically going to a personal monopoly that evolved, that ended up being organic. And that's why there's no one that has this weird combination of things like Packy. And that's why we like his stuff.
Amen. Is my screen still up? Okay, I'm gonna reshare.
I stole it from you. It said, do you want to disable Packy's screen sharing? I said, that's exactly what I wanted.
So this is just like a quick kind of back of your mind. You don't have to write anything down, but just like while we're here, think of the three things that you're most interested in and the three ways that your friends would describe you. And I think the second part of that is the part that I missed the first time. I was just thinking about three things that I was interested in, but I think so much of it is how you bring your own kind of personality and interests and just like what makes you unique to it that ends up helping you find your voice. So three things you're most interested in, three ways your friends would describe you. You don't have to do anything with those now, but if you take Rite of Passage, I'm giving you a head start on finding your personal monopoly.
Hey, Packy, I have a question, and I'm going to sort of cloud it in a story. So I've been reading the Wright brothers biography. And one of the things is there's a concept that I've begun to pick up by reading the biography, which is this concept of surprising similarities. And a lot of times our ideas, intellectual ideas of what things in a personal monopoly could be adjacent aren't actually what are adjacent. When it comes to the Wright brothers biography, this is what I mean. The Wright brothers in the late 19th century, the big craze was this crazy thing called the bicycle. All these people were riding the bicycle. All these old men and women were like, oh, the bicycle's bad because kids aren't going to be reading books. They're going to go too far away from home. The bicycle's making things dangerous, but people loved bicycles. And the Wright brothers lived in Dayton, Ohio. And they said, you know what? We're going to open a bicycle shop. Wilbur was the older brother. And he sort of said, you know what? I'm not very fit for business, but the dad, he was a preacher and he had all these books in the house. And so Wilbur, the older brother, started reading all these books. And the Wright brothers realized, this is weird. What we learned about making bicycles actually really helped us with flying airplanes. And that those two things, even though one is on the ground, one is in the sky, like both geographically and intellectually, it seems like they couldn't be further apart. They were actually surprisingly similar in the skills that were required in order to achieve them. And I'm wondering for you, Packy, if there are any sort of surprising similarities in your own story, things that came through in your personal monopoly where you're like, I did that over here and it's actually really close, but it seems like a long way away.
Yeah, I mean, it maybe doesn't even seem like a long way away. Like I was, kind of both class clown and a good student, I think, kind of throughout school. And so like literally I would write essays that I'd get, in high school or something that I'd get an A+ on, but it was like Jane Eyre as a dominatrix because I had a really strict English teacher who I wanted to make laugh. And I wanted it to be like such a tightly argued essay and weird that like she had no choice but to give it a good grade despite the fact that she was uptight. And so I think like that's hopefully kind of one of the things that sticks in my writing is that I want it to be like funny and fun and approachable and like a good way for you to learn kind of about what's going on in the world without actually feeling like you're sitting down and learning. But like also kind of fun and tightly argued. So I think that's a big one that comes to mind.
I love that.
All right, number 2. Most essays don't start as fully formed ideas. That's another one, and I think we'll get a little bit more into the writing process again in a little bit. But this is another one that David said during Read a Passage that I like didn't fully get or understand. Where he's like, just like if you have an interesting idea, like start asking your friends about it and see what's surprising and see if they find it interesting at all or not interesting at all. And then if there is like that little spark of curiosity and interest in something that seems to surprise them, then like start pulling on that thread and go a little bit deeper and then tweet about it and then maybe do a thread. And then finally you can like work your way up into an essay. And so that's like a trick that I do a lot of times when I'm writing an essay, like where, I was writing about Axie Infinity and I saw the revenue charts. And so I'd run it by a few different people and be like, have you heard of Axie Infinity? Like, did you know that they're on pace to do like $150 million in revenue in July alone? And then if people were shocked, then I knew there was something there and they were. So I developed that. Another trick that I do is like my brain is just, as I've written a million times, like really just not wired to see the downside in things. And so when I was writing about Ethereum, I was sitting there and I was like, all right, what's the bear case? What's the bear case? What's the bear case? And so instead I just did like a bait kind of tweet where I asked people why I shouldn't just put a ton of my money into Ethereum. And I got over 1,000 responses that kind of like argued the bull case and like let me know what I should bolster throughout the essay. So I think this can be a lot more fun if it's an interactive process. I also like not revealing what I'm writing about too early sometimes. So it's a delicate balance there. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but it is helpful if I'm stuck on something to just kind of talk to friends or tweet about it ahead of time. So think about a topic you're dying to tell your friends or family about, then tell them, and then see what surprises them and what bores them.
I want to pop in here and just build on something that Packy was saying that I think is really important. Writing doesn't always look like writing. And what that means is that Packy is doing writing in conversation. Did you hear the word shocked that he said? What he's doing is he finds something. He's like, ooh, that's interesting. And all this is happening at a subconscious level. But he's saying, ooh, that's interesting. I'm going to go tell people. And then if time and again people are shocked, that then means that I should be writing about that. And what Packy's doing, without even realizing it, he's already doing it, so it doesn't cost him any extra time, is as he tells people, he's working out 2 things. First, how he should structure the piece, which happens automatically by telling people. And second of all, he is getting a sense of what is confusing to people and what the inevitable follow-up questions are. And then by the time that Packy gets to a place where he sits down to write stuff, he's already worked out a lot of the hard problems of writing.
100% right. Another trick that I just thought of in this category, I wrote a piece last year about kind of the return to work and the fact that like we're never going back fully to the office kind of full time like we have in the past. And that just came from conversations with Pusha, my wife, about like her not wanting to go back to the office and being like, but it's like there's not anything that I can like just point my boss to that says like, this is why I shouldn't go back to the office. And I was like, I bet there are probably a lot of people out there who want just like one kind of condensed argument as to why people aren't like the best companies aren't going to bring their employees back to the office. And so like, that's where that came from. So I think a lot of it too comes from like finding things that maybe people are either like talking about, but no one's crystallized in a good way, or like an argument that no one's made exactly in the most useful way. So there's a bunch of like, just, I think the cool thing about writing, or one of the cool things about writing, is that it changes the way that you have conversations and that you listen to things and that you read things. So you're like always on the hunt for that little nugget that you can use in your next essay. So I think it makes you just a more present, like better thinker.
Exactly. And the thing is, the difference is that a lot of people think of writing as, in order to write, I need to cancel all my plans for the weekend and I need to not see anybody. And yes, sometimes in order to write, you're going to need some deep work time. But there's a lot of writing that you can do just during the course of your life. And if you want to write more and do it at a higher quality, it just requires a subtle perspective shift of being more aware of how others are responding to you and how your body is basically reacting to different ideas. What is exciting to you? Just getting aware of that makes writing so much easier for you.
100%. That said, a thesis really helps. So like, I think it helps for this very reason. Like once you have your thesis, or once you have like kind of the spark of the idea and you develop what the thesis is, then you can like really start pulling in those kinds of things as you're cruising Twitter, or as you're talking to your friends, or as you're doing whatever you do in your daily life. That said, hopefully sometimes, and this has happened with me, the facts as you do more research can change your thesis, so don't get married to something, but it does help to kind of have something that all the little pieces can stick to as you're thinking. And then number 3, this is another one that I thought was like total bullshit, to be honest, was the serendipity engine. Because I was like coming at it from 300 Twitter followers, and I would tweet something about the Philadelphia Eagles and no one would respond. And I was like, this one doesn't make any sense to me. But one of the ideas was, the point of writing online is that you develop you build this serendipity engine, and you open yourself up to all sorts of interesting conversations and people who are interested in the same thing coming and talking to you about those things, and maybe give you opportunities in those fields and all of that kind of stuff. I think this is kind of the idea that I had in my head when I was writing this piece called The Great Online Game, which is like, really, if you just jump in and play, and that might be writing, that might mean joining a Discord, that might mean, joining a group chat that has a bunch of people who are nerdy about like the very particular thing that you are. If you just like kind of get out there and put out what you're interested in, really wild stuff happens. And like, it seems counterintuitive, but then the math is also kind of crazy. Like there's over 3 billion people online. Like niches can be absolutely massive. And the internet's really, really good at helping you find like the other few people who are interested in that very particular thing that you are. And so if you can put out well-reasoned and structured thoughts on the thing that you're interested in, it really does actually kind of attract, other people who are interested in those same things. So that's been one of the coolest parts by far of writing online. And this is an important point too, because I've seen both sides of it. You have to write about something that you actually care about and want to spend a lot of time talking about, because it attracts people, whether it's like actually the thing that you're interested in or not. And so I've written about things that I'm less interested in, and then people will be like, hey, you want to grab a coffee and talk about that thing? And I'm like, no, I never want to talk about that thing ever again. And so, it's such a powerful thing that it even attracts people that you don't want to talk to necessarily. So I think that's just another kind of point in the favor of just like, even if you don't think it's going to be the most popular thing in the world, pick the thing that you're most interested in, because cool stuff will happen even if it's on a micro scale.
Packy, can you share a story of a kind of serendipity that was wild to you in terms of maybe somebody you met in person, or something that came from writing online that was like, whoa, I would have never gotten this had I not been sharing my ideas in public?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like, I wrote about it in one of the emails, but like, the Acquired podcast is one that I've just like listened to forever. I thought that David and Ben, who are the hosts, were like, again, these like foreign deities who just had a deep voice and talked about like all the companies that I was interested in and did a better job on it than I ever could and all of that. Then I wrote a piece on Slack, which is like this company that, we all use all the time, that I thought was just beaten up too much by the market. And then like this wild thing happened where after I wrote about it, a couple of weeks later, Salesforce came in and bought Slack. And then the next thing you know, like Ben and David invited me on Acquire to talk about the acquisition of Slack. And it was just like, I'm not a Slack expert. I was just like willing to go out there and say like, everybody's wrong about this company. Like it's worth more than than people think. And because of that, I got to meet these guys who I'd listened to all of the time. And now they've become really good friends. So that's what I mean. Even the fact that we're here and there's as many people on the Zoom as I had Twitter followers when I started writing is absolutely crazy, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, it was, like I mentioned, it was cool to even be called out that one time in like one sentence where you're like, hey, this was a good essay. And so now the fact that you'd even invite me to come do this, like all those kinds of things, like it's little things that happen kind of almost daily at this point. There was a job, I can't say which company, unfortunately, but it like wasn't even an actual job. It was just like something that somebody made up and was like, would you be interested in like designing your own thing here and working with these people? And it was a job that I would have murdered multiple people for, just 6 months ago. And I was like, actually like the writing thing is great. So I'm not going to do that. But like those kinds of things, I think just happen with surprising frequency. And like starting early on, like there were things too, where there were, I had 1,000 subscribers on the newsletter, and somebody who was related to the company that I wrote about would reach out or something like that. So it happens the whole time. It's not just like a now thing.
What sticks out to me here is most people in the world who spend a lot of time on the internet, the shape of their life looks something like this. They spend all this time reading, watching videos, obsessing over stuff alone. And then they'll go out, they'll see friends, they'll see family, and the people in their lives just aren't interested in those things. And so they live these weird two-faced lives where when they're alone, they're enthusiastic, they're passionate about ideas. And then when they get out into the world, they have to suppress and squash that enthusiasm. And what writing online gives you, it's not about being famous. It's not about having a lot of followers. That's not the point. The point is living a life where the people who you surround yourself with elevate your intellectual ambitions, elevate and expand your curiosity, and add to the flame of enthusiasm rather than trying to suck all the oxygen out of it.
Amen. So yeah, why writing line is worth it. That's good. I mean, like that, I think says it very well. I think it's also never been more important to be able to tell a good story. And that doesn't mean that it's your full-time gig and that you decide that you want to leave your job and become a writer and write a newsletter. Like that is a weird path to take. And I only fell ass backwards into it because that was kind of what was in front of me when COVID started. But I think writing, even just for yourself, helps you make sense of everything. So one of the first reasons I actually wanted to start writing was, I would read a ton, and then someone would ask me a detail about a thing that I'd read, and I'd be like, I forget the character's name, because I just didn't do anything with the information, and it fell out of my brain, and I have a terrible memory. It's obviously a valuable skill at any company, and I would have said this before COVID, but particularly post-COVID, when more and more companies are remote, the ability to express yourself in the written word, I think is just an increasingly valuable skill. Actually, I mean, the Not Boring Club was, as David mentioned, not a great company idea, but it was an interesting way for me to kind of MVP it in a really low cost way without writing a line of code, without hiring anybody, without anything. I could just write essays related to the idea, put them out there and see what people thought about them. And on the investing side, I think it's useful because it just kind of clarifies your thinking and makes you take all these disparate things and put them down kind of on one page and say here's my thesis. So even if you don't want to write full time, I think it's a valuable skill to start practicing. And then I guess the last serendipity engine things, I started this story. I made this deck last night before it had the Ben Thompson thing in there. It was the first thing I ever wrote about. My favorite writer, someone who I almost didn't write about what I wanted to write about because I thought it would never be as good as Ben Thompson. And then this morning he quoted me, and like I had a full section in Stratechery, which is like my favorite newsletter. This guy's like my writing hero. So it's just a weird thing that I just would never in a million years have anticipated would happen. And so I don't know, I thought the timing on that was crazy that we were having this session today and that happened this morning. So I don't know, good things, interesting things at least. Like this is, I didn't make $1 million off of him doing that. Like it's not life-changing, but it's just like this series of very cool serendipitous things that happen. And then last but not least, the not boring process, how I write not boring. I've included this graphic in the email as well. This is still very true, where it is like every single week a total roller coaster to get a piece out. I think probably, and I'd love to hear David's thoughts on this. Like if for him it's more of a structured process that is predictable and all of that. For me, it is absolutely not that. It is, thinking about, I have no idea, for example, what I'm writing about this Monday. This past week's essay, the one that Ben Thompson linked to, I wrote after I got back driving from a wedding on Sunday, woke up at 5:30, got back at noon and started writing. And so it's like a messy, nerve-wracking process every single week. So I actually don't have like a really great overarching writing process, but I would say one, consume broadly in the things that you're curious about. Two, as I mentioned, pull on the surprising things. And then three, it does get easier over time as you have these building blocks. And I think Ben Thompson is actually awesome at this. He can put something pretty great out every day. And half of it is like literal building blocks where he's just pulling from things that he's written before, but even less kind of literally or obviously. I think your knowledge just kind of compounds as you write about a particular thing over time. And so while it doesn't get easier and while I don't have a great process, I feel like I can dive into something and at least pull on concepts that I've touched on before. And that helps form kind of the overarching, form a base that I can use when I go out and write. So instead of me kind of talking about a process, I'd love to just like kind of riff with David on kind of what a good writing process looks like here, and then what I should be doing differently. And you can ask questions on how I'm doing it and all of that.
Yeah. Is it true that you listen to audiobooks while you sleep and then you have the process to make highlights?
I wish. I mean, I really do wish there was an easier way to highlight podcasts, because I spend so much of my writing process going back and re-listening to podcasts and just like trying to put it on, 0.75 speed so I can type as fast as they're talking. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's a lot of immersion in content around a topic and then just starting to write. And that's like kind of what the writing process looks like.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So when you're listening to a podcast, how do you think about the two kinds of information? Information, one, article or information for the article that you're writing right now. Information two is ideas for future articles where you don't know how you're going to use that information, but we'll say that it adds to your intellectual building blocks.
Yeah. So this is actually one thing that I need to figure out how to get better at, and it's related to my messy last minute process. But because I give myself kind of 3 days to write each piece, particularly if I have a Monday and a Thursday piece in a given week, I am fully zoned in on that one topic. And so when I'm listening to something, it's like the founder of the company or somebody talking about that company or somebody talking about a particular idea. And so I'm just like looking for different tidbits and looking kind of just to generally understand it better and see if there are things that I wouldn't have thought about before, if there are good quotes, if there are things that are, run counter to the way that I think about the company, all of that. When I'm reading something, listening to podcasts, talking to people about it, I'm looking for those types of things. I think and hope that like, as I'm just kind of consuming stuff, some of it related to the topic, some of it just scrolling Twitter, some of it just reading for fun, that like some things just kind of float around in my brain. And then when I'm panicking on Thursday afternoon, thinking about what I'm going to write about on Monday, I can like somehow occasionally be like, all right, this thing is kind of interesting. And so I think it's unintentionally in the back of my mind, all the stuff that I've consumed, but I'm not actively saying like, all right, this goes in my future bucket. This goes in my right now bucket.
How do you think about structure? Are you somebody who actually does outlines with a whiteboard? Do you just type everything out? You watch the structure emerge? You do a lot of copying and pasting? Okay, so I'm getting a lot of nods from you. So then it sounds like you just sort of write things out. So then once you get there, do you ever get to a place where the piece is a little disjointed? Like I almost think of writing like a game of Sudoku, where you basically have all these, you have one big puzzle, and then you have all these little blocks inside. And then what happens is you'll change one line in a block on the left side, but now that impacts three other blocks. So what do you do when you get there? Once the piece begins to get disjointed, you write stuff out on a whiteboard. What do you do to help yourself organize?
Yeah, if it's really a mess, then I'll set up a different. So every time I write, I start out. I used to start out with an outline doc, which I don't do. I just realized that I don't actually like doing outlines, so I don't do that anymore. So I start out with my notes in Athens. I start out, which is like Rome. I start out with a blank Google Doc that I like change the font to spectral and like get in the zone by putting a title, at least placeholder there. And then I have a Google Sheet where I might do like little calculations as I go. And then when it gets really bad, I have what I call a dump doc, which is for like those huge paragraphs or sections that I'll write that like I just don't think work, or like maybe there's tidbits in, but I don't want to just hit delete on them. I rarely ever go back to that and pull things back in, but instead of just deleting, I take big sections and put them over there and rewrite things. I do think sometimes it's as little as like figuring out the transition sentences and the connections between things, and not as much the paragraphs themselves. Like the paragraphs themselves may be fine, but they do feel like the flow is totally messed up. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about like, do all these things kind of feed into each other in the way that I think that they do?
In terms of branding, this is something that you do so distinctly. What were some of the early indicators that what you were doing was working? And then later on, what caused you to pull back a little bit from the pop culture angle?
Yeah. So the pop culture angle was just, I think that it started actually. So before even that Mickey Mouse essay, I was stuck at home, early COVID. We had Amazon Prime. And so I watched the fashion show that they had on Amazon Prime. And I was like, wow, look, there's actually like a bunch of stuff that feeds into Amazon's strategy here. And so it was like almost just an accident of COVID that I was stuck at home watching this thing and also interested in Amazon. And so accidentally wrote a piece that kind of combined this dumb TV show with like Amazon strategy. And so like that got good-ish feedback. And so yeah, cool. Like maybe there's something to pull on here. Then I was thinking about this like over-optimistic take on COVID where I was like, actually, I think this is kind of going to be good. There's like a lot of people stuck in jobs at bloated companies where they're not actually doing anything. And like, maybe this will break things free. And then I was kind of like, that's kind of like the Mickey Mouse Club. And so like when I had two of those things in a row that kind of worked and then I was starting to get good feedback on, I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to lean into this intersection of pop culture and tech and strategy and all of that. Honestly, when I stopped doing it was because it was almost like writing two essays, kind of like figuring out what the actual company and strategy of whatever piece of it was, and then spending a ton of time trying to think about like what the pop culture reference was that would work and writing about that. And at some point it just felt like I was doing 2 times the work and it wasn't fully worth it. And so I just decided to like kind of slowly drop that, but keep the tone because the tone was just kind of my natural tone anyway.
I love this line in one of your emails. I had friends who were killing it in their careers, and I legitimately thought they were all sitting in on a group text somewhere talking shit on me. What do you say to a bunch of people here who want to write, who know that they have good ideas, who hear what other people are saying, and they say, nope, that's not true. I have a better perspective. I know the true answer there. They write it all down. They get to the computer, and then they get to a place where they just can't hit that publish button. They cannot stick their necks out there. What do you say to those people?
I'll start with an unintentional sales pitch for Rite of Passage on this one. Like one of the best things for me from the course was not like, anybody went in and corrected my sentence structure or I became like a better technical writer probably because of it. But there was something to showing up to a group of people who one, all did the work themselves. So you at least had to do the work. There was a bit of peer pressure and kind of hitting send and all of that. But then also it's seeing like, we have discussions on that exact feeling and seeing that everybody, like even the people in the class that I looked up to the most and had more to it about, whatever, all had that exact same feeling where they felt like, people were judging them and that they couldn't hit send, they were scared to, and blah, blah, blah. And the unlock for me, other than just like doing it, was the realization that like nobody gives a shit about you. And like, there's just way too much information out there for people to actually like spend time, one, reading your whole thing if they think it's bad. And then two, spending more time talking about it. Like, I guess if there are people who want to do all of that, you probably don't want to be friends with those people in the first place, but like really like nobody, there's so much content out there. Like nobody has time to hate read things unless they're an awful person. And so like people just don't really care about you that much. And I feel like that's a liberating thing, that if something's bad, nobody really cares. And if something's great, then people start caring. But like the bad stuff, everybody kind of just forgets pretty quickly. Like don't do anything offensive or awful, but as long as it's just like not well written or something, nobody cares.
One of the things that I think is interesting is how your growth strategy has changed so much and evolved so much. And I think that this is sort of inherent in a lot of what marketing is you're just looking for opportunities and you're trying all these different experiments, and then you're saying, okay, that works, I'm going to double down on it. And so you've done things like grown your email list through referrals. You've done things like the product hunt launch that you mentioned. What else have you done, and how have you thought about growth on the email list?
Yeah, I guess another couple tricks. Like in the beginning, I'd write about a company, and this was like kind of accidental, but it worked. Where if I wrote about a company that had a lot of passionate employees, they'd all share it. And so that was a pretty good unlock.
That's a good one.
I would join, Slack communities or something that were related and be like, hey, I wrote this thing that you guys might be interested in, which doesn't work particularly well, but kind of can get you a few people. And in the beginning, I think it is just about getting enough like activation energy. So like very much the Paul Graham, do things that don't scale in the beginning, like getting to 1,000 people help product hunt happen, which helped get to 3,000 people. And then it's kind of grown on its own since then. Frankly, in the past, like 9 months or so, I haven't done much on the growth side. And I've really tried to focus more on just like, I don't have time even to do the growth stuff. Like it's just focus more on writing good stuff. And I found that like at a certain point, as long as you're writing good stuff, it takes care of itself. So I think that was actually a kind of a freeing unlock, was when I was like, all right, I'm going to stop trying to do growth tactics and just write, and hopefully it's good. And if it's good, it'll get out. And if it doesn't, actually one other one that I did was when I had a guest post to write about Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, I like went to a Kardashian subreddit and posted it there, and like it did fine. I've gotten also banned from, I'm sure, a bunch of subreddits, from Hacker News, from a bunch of stuff for promoting. But ultimately, if those people come in because they care about that one particular topic, they're the most likely to leave also and to not be engaged and whatever. So I'd rather just have people who kind of come to it on their own and are actually interested in the same things, as opposed to people that I'm like begging or paying to come and read Not Boring.
What are you going for in your pieces in terms of like, what is a piece, or what things does a piece have where like, yeah, I'm actually proud to publish it this week? I mean, I assume it was tongue in cheek, but you said that you don't think a lot of stuff that you publish is good. Presumably sometimes you do think it's good. So like, what is the difference between those two?
I mean, I think actually the challenging part is like, I never think it's great, because, and this is, I think, a common thing where I'll think about all the things that I wanted to kind of get to, but couldn't figure out how to fit in the essay, or like all the information that I had, but couldn't include. And so I almost think about it as like, I assume that everybody who reads that particular piece like knows all of that stuff. And it's like, why didn't you include all those things that you could have included? And again, like they don't have that background. And so it's like something that is just wrong in my head, but that's how I think about it. So that's why I'm never like fully happy with it. I think what I'm going for with it, and this has kind of emerged over the past few months, is like, if I can make, like, I think the future is going to keep getting crazier. And I wrote about that last week in this essay called Compounding Crazy. And I think that there's either people who are like out there just like kind of brash and just assuming that everyone feels the same way that they do or they're idiots. And then there are people who are just like, things have to get less crazy. Like, it's already too crazy right now. And so I'm almost trying to be like the translator between those two and trying to like, be like, hey, here's like the foundational reasons why like this is probably actually like this trend will continue. And it's not a crazy thing. It's grounded in like this old principle and whatever, but it is more likely to continue to get crazy. So like trying to get people to, I guess, be more, open-minded and comfortable with new things.
Hey, Packy, question on my end. You use a lot of interesting metaphors. You coin terms. You use these, playful language. Do you have a filter where there's certain things that you sort of toss in the reject pile, or how do you think about, hey, this will play well, this will really take off? The great Twitter game versus things that are just too far. Like, what's your sense on what makes it and what doesn't?
It probably feels like from the outside, like there's more thought put into a lot of this stuff than there actually is. The great online game. I think I wrote that title that morning, maybe, or like, was writing it. That was another one where like Sunday morning or Saturday afternoon, I had no idea what I was going to be writing about. And so I was like, all right, I need to like kind of figure out, like, I am feeling this thing. And actually those are some of the pieces that end up doing the best. And they all feel the dumbest to me. Like I thought that was a fairly dumb piece, because it just feels like this thing that's like kind of obvious because it's one of those things that's like floating out there, but that hasn't been put into words kind of. And so there's like something about just taking a big like hairy thing and just putting it into words, even if it seems like non-groundbreaking, that people resonate with. But there's not a lot of intentionality about it. I wrote the word like superverse in the piece this week. And it was kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of, I literally Googled just to make sure that super means above. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, it kind of sits above all these other networks and breaks in. So I don't think there's many times where I think there's a bridge too far. I think as long as like I'm fun and playful with it and I'm not taking myself too seriously, and I'm like, here's the word superverse. Like, you all need to use the word superverse now. As long as like that's not my approach to it, it's just like, oh, here's a dumb word that I just made up. Then it's not as frightening to go throw something like that out.
Yeah, definitely. How often, and we had some questions in the chat about your idea generation. How often do you have, half a dozen ideas on the back burner that you're pulling off the shelf in a given week versus like something brand new that week that you didn't expect to write about?
Yeah, like the outline doc, there was also a doc at one point that was just a running list of ideas that I had, and different companies that I might write about or different topics to pull on. And every time, like even a few days later, I went back to that list, things would seem stale. I think I wrote about when we did the Rite of Passage Fellowship, and I had to write about one thing for multiple months. I got so bored of that topic by the end of it. I'm just a little ADD on this stuff. So any list that I would have had, I think gets stale quickly. And I think, it makes it obviously like way more nerve-wracking than being able to plan in advance. But I think it also hopefully keeps it fresher, and I can like, NFTs exploded last week, so I don't have to move something else out of the way to talk about the thing that happened last week. Right. I can keep it a little bit more current by not having a list.
Got it. Awesome. A couple questions in the chat about motivation or stamina. Adam was asking about how do you find motivation when you ever felt like giving up at a certain point? Anthony had asked, when things become a slog, how do you make sure you don't miss a week or fall behind? So any tips, especially for people starting out, how to keep that weekly cadence?
That is the hardest part of this. Like, I am just a streak person kind of, where, like if one of the years when I was in investment banking out of school, like working fairly brutal hours, and would go to the gym and like maybe go run to the gym, do one pull up and leave, just so that I could like keep the streak going, because I knew that if I broke that streak, I'd be kind of done. I feel like it's a little bit similar now. There's actually a nice check on it now too, so which I'll explain, but I think it's a little bit similar now, where I feel like if I give myself, a random week off, then I can do that again in the future. And so I just like, even if nobody cares, I'm like pretending like I think a lot of people care if I miss a week, and just let myself start doing that. The other thing now that I have is, because I'm writing sponsored posts every other Thursday, what I really don't want to do is shift that balance too far, where I'm like skipping Mondays and then only doing sponsored posts. And so I've built in that kind of mechanism for myself. But yeah, I think it's more just that like I'm a glutton for punishment on this kind of stuff. And I'm like, all right, fuck it. I said I have to write. I'm going to write something this week. But like, it is not like 100%, like I am a carefree, happy-go-lucky person normally. I'd say a month ago, it was like as depressed is too strong a word, but like as stressed out as I have ever been in my life. 10-month-old, 9-month-old baby at the time, not sleeping, raising a venture fund, trying to write 2 times a week. I had a period where I had 3 Thursday pieces back to back just by a kind of scheduling accident. And like, I just thought I'd had to quit. Like I was so unbelievably stressed out. And then you just do it and get through it. And then now I'm kind of back to being just like a low grade, moderate stress. And so I think as long as you can realize that like there's something on the other side, there are going to be periods where it's more and less stressful.
Yeah, I want to pop in here because first with a comment, then a question. I think a lot of times we want to get to a place where we're like, no, I'm going to be able to write with no negative emotions. And that's what I need in order to write.
If anybody could do that, by the way, it's me. Like, like I am just not I don't get stressed. And so the fact that I did, I think is about to prove what you're about to say.
So a couple years ago, Jeff Bezos in one of his annual letters talked about handstands of all things. And he said there are 2 kinds of people who do handstands or something like this. And there's some people who think that they're going to do it fast. And those are the people who don't end up doing handstands. There's other people who know it's going to take a long time and they do it anyway. And they know it's going to take a long time from the beginning. And so they persevere. And those are the people who end up doing handstands. And the way that this applies to online writing is if you think that you're not going to go through lulls of motivation, if you think that every article that you write is going to be easy, if you think that you're going to do great work without ever getting to a place where you never speak negatively about yourself, where you never get in a place where you're stressed, where you're anxious, if you think you're going to face none of those negative emotions, you're not going to be able to succeed as an online writer. What it takes to succeed as a writer, to do it consistently, to do it at a high level, is to get to a place where, like you're doing handstands, you know it's going to be hard and you do it anyways, and you love that resistance. You love that negative emotions because those things will teach you as much about yourself as anything else that you do in life.
Agreed.
Packy, when you're, being cited in, Stratechery and being seen as sort of an authority figure on some of the topics you're talking about, how does that feel when you're getting into new topics that you're not terribly familiar with? Does it make you want to almost over research? Is the feedback process after you've written a draft really important, right? Because if you're going out to this big audience, how do you just sort of shore yourself up when you're, stepping out into new territory?
Totally. I mean, like every week I have ambassadors because I've also kept it, like, I think there's probably, advice to go more niche and less broad and whatever. And I've decided to go fairly broad and cover kind of whatever interests me at the time. And so there's imposter syndrome like every single week. And like, even, this piece that blew up on NFTs a little bit, like there are tens of thousands of people. First of all, there's 10,000 punks that are owned. I don't own a single one of those. Like there are thousands of more people who are like more in it and qualified to like actually talk about the details of something. So I think not pretending like I'm that like the guy and more just being like, here's something that I'm seeing. I like might be wrong on this and kind of couching it and those kinds of things. Certainly the feedback process is good and like trying to get somebody at least who knows what they're talking about on the topic to look at it every time and be like, here's where you're just like totally wrong. That's really helpful. I like to avoid being totally wrong if I can. But I think so much of it is now like kind of speculative, at least, that as long as I'm honest about the fact that I like don't have the answers, but I'm seeing this cool thing happening, then I think that's how I get around it.
Packy, I want to talk about the nature of inspiration. What originally struck you about Ben Thompson's work? What about Stratechery was so moving to you that you said, I want to do that, I have to do that, and I'm going to write like that when I start?
There were a few different things. Like one, it was just that people, that I thought were smart also were reading it. I like, just thinking about strategy and had before and liked reading books. And then I found Stratechery and I was like, oh, cool. Like this is that applied just like what's happening right now. And you can do this in real time. And so I thought that was cool. And then it was, I mean, it really was that thing a little bit of breather where like, as I was doing things in real time, I'd go back to something that Ben Thompson had written and like pull it in. And some of those were his new ideas. Some of them were things like that he took from Clayton Christensen, but it was all like in one easy to understand spot. So I'd go back there and be like, cool, I'm going to try, like, think about this problem this way. And then it would work. And so like that to me was very cool. Like, I think that, you know, strategy can be overused and you can like kind of seem like a charlatan if you're like, I'm the strategy guy in a company, whatever. But I think going the opposite way is also super dangerous, where like, if your company, the CEO that we brought into Breather, not a strategy guy, and then like you just don't have, like, you have a bunch of people working really hard in no direction, which is almost the same as like not working. The effect is the same as not working hard, but everybody's burnt out also. So it's just like this really shitty thing. And so I don't know, I think that I think of companies as full of a lot of people. And so I think like that's what I liked about it, is that like these things that you write can actually like impact these people's like day to day and the quality of their lives. And like, oh, by the way, if these are great companies reading this that are building things that will help like humanity in some way, then having them think about it the right way is like super important. If it means that you can like get a rocket to space or like develop medical technology or something. So I'm not saying that Not Boring has done that at all. I've been writing about NFTs, which I think are interesting, but like not going to save people's lives for right now. But I think like that's it. That just like, it's a thing that I think was probably either like too textbook and like dry and quackish, or like dismissed. And so trying to find like a middle ground where it's like, no, this stuff's like kind of fun and cool to think about, and you can apply it and your company will actually do better and you'll be happier in your job.
So that was looking back at Ben Thompson. Now let's look forward to where you're going to be in 3 years. Who are the people that are inspiring you now? And if I were to say, Packy, where do you want to go? Where are you being pulled towards? What do you say to that?
I am a terrible planner, as evidenced, I think, by my story. Like, not a good planner, not good at thinking ahead. Right now I'm writing and doing this venture fund.
How about for actually improving your writing? So where is your writing lacking in quality?
It's too long, for sure. 100%. If I were a better writer, my pieces would be shorter and I'd be able to say more in fewer words. And so that's one where, like, you know, if I ever get a couple weeks off and like can go back and think about it, or if I give myself more time to edit, my pieces would all be shorter. I think that's the biggest one. I think, you know, my natural limitation is that I'm not particularly skeptical. And so that is another thing that I'd love to get better at, is like really being able to red team everything that I write ahead of time. And that's probably also something that like more time helps with. But I think like probably doing, I don't know, part of me says like doing a more balanced take. And part of me says that there's plenty of skepticism out there. And so the reason that people come to Not Boring is for kind of the more optimistic take on things. And so on the whole, they get a balanced take, and maybe it's not my job to red team my stuff. But I'd say those are like the two kind of weak points, you know, in Not Boring, is they're too long and they're not skeptical enough.
Packy, I got a question on information consumption. Something a lot of people struggle with. I struggle with. There's so much information out there, and you know, there's so many interesting topics, and there's so many depth in each topic. So, do you have any rules of thumb for information you say no to, or boundaries that keep you somewhat focused without going too wide?
Oof, that's a really good one. Yeah, I mean, it's not that there's any like hard and fast rules. It's really just like, as I'm pulling things, I can tell pretty quickly if it's well written, if there's going to be anything novel in there, like all of that kind of stuff is just like a sense that I get from having just done a bunch of this, where it's like this one doesn't actually seem like it's going to add much to the conversation, or it's poorly written, or it's like derivative of something else that actually has the meat of the argument. And so I'd say it's more of a sense than anything else. Because I think going broad and like going to people that I don't know is where you can find some of the coolest stuff that other people don't know. And like, if you like go to the deepest, darkest quarters of the internet, you can find, I think, more interesting information that fewer people know about. So I do want to go super broad, but I think you can kind of tell if something is going to be good or not early on, and then, you know, skip the rest if needed.
Yeah. So instinct. People earlier had been asking about podcasts you recommend. I guess I'll broaden it a bit, but any couple hidden gems of sources that you pull from that, if they're not too secret, that you'd want to share with the group here.
I mean, like, I don't know. For me, it's there's not like one that I go back to every single time. Like, I do like Stratechery. I think if I'm writing about a company that Acquired has done a podcast on, I'm going to be listening to that. You know, I love Harry Stebbings' podcast, and I know, I think like I've mentioned before, but like Tina Hay at Pace Capital, like in her like just Web3 stuff, and like I think she's just like a very it's almost like ethereal, but also she touches like things that are happening in tech. I really like that to keep my writing like a little bit weird from an inspiration perspective. I think Mario Gabriel's really, really good and just like writes a lot more beautifully than I do. Bern Hobart is like an absolute genius, is like Pamela was in my Rite of Passage class, but like absolute genius. And I don't know how he puts out the things that he puts out every day. So like there are some people that I'll read often, and I'm definitely forgetting people. But a lot of it is just, trying to find new stuff by the fun part about this is I can say spending time on Twitter is my job now. And a lot of it is just like kind of following people as I'm interested in the topic and seeing what people are talking about and reading those things and going deep. And then I think I've been on a kick of like the classics recently where I did some Tim Urban, and then I did a piece that was based on Eugene Way, and the one that I'm writing tomorrow is based on Ben Thompson's Amazon tax. And so I think like it's a combination of finding like the new stuff that everybody's talking about, and then also applying it to some like more kind of grounded things and older things that have stood the test of time a little bit more. And those pieces are all, I think, in the past 5 years, so not like super old, but I think it's like that combination that can be helpful.
Cool.
I've won a couple years ago, probably actually more than a decade ago, a guy named Joel Sapolsky wrote these strategy letters on software that are absolutely excellent. And what I just put in the chat is a guy named Guern summarized the article that Sapolsky wrote on this idea called commoditize or complement, which is, yes, I think one of the most important ideas that I've come across just when it comes to thinking intelligently about business.
That's a great one. I love that one.
All right. Let's see if it's some other questions from the chat. Actually, this is sort of interesting because this is you had a website and a newsletter. You shifted to newsletter only. Any strong feelings on that? Were you just following the signal, or any thoughts for people starting out on website versus newsletter?
Yeah, started with the website, added the newsletter, would like copy and paste back over because I was on Squarespace and I was writing in a Google Doc and then in Substack and trying to copy then over onto Squarespace. Copying into Squarespace is a miserable experience. And so I just kind of stopped at some point, and everybody was going to notboring.co anyway. And so that was, there's no master plan in this head. It's like really just, do I have time to do this thing in the moment? And if I don't, then I just don't do it. And because Squarespace has a kind of like block architecture, then like things were just getting messed up as I copied things over, and it was too much time to do it.
Got it. Okay, cool. I was just curious. All right. So I think that was our last question. I know, David, you want to say a word about Rite of Passage before we get out of here?
Yeah. So for all of you who are here, Rite of Passage is a course that I run. Of course, Packy was in the very first cohort, and it begins in just a couple weeks. Enrollment opens on August 23rd. And this chat, this enthusiasm, this just raw obsession with the craft of writing online, this is what we do for 5 weeks. And I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in conversation with people like Packy. I've written hundreds of articles, and everything is distilled into a 5-week curriculum. You're going to meet a bunch of cool people. You're going to write a ton. You're going to learn all about the craft of writing. And it's high energy. It's intense. And I remember when I was a kid, all my best teachers, they had high standards and they held their students to an extremely high bar. And that's what I'm going to do for you. Rite of Passage is a place where I'm going to expect you to rise up to achieve more than you think that you can. And I'm going to help you with knowledge. I'm going to help you with a community that's going to hold you accountable and give you structure for writing. And Packy, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that. Like, it did actually seem impossibly intense at times during that because I was working and like had to get something done in the early morning hours or after work or whatever. But I mean, it has, and I wrote this, and I actually believe this, like, been the best investment that I've made. Like, I would probably be in a job somewhere, and like not talking to all of you, obviously, if I'd never taken this course. So I could not recommend it more highly. It is definitely going to be hard, and it's also what you make it. It can also be easy. Like, you're paying money, like David's not coming to your house and making it right. It can also be very easy. If you're going to do it, I think you should probably just like kind of go for it for 5 weeks and do the thing. But whether you want to be a professional writer or just become a little bit of a better thinker, I think it's a totally worthwhile and great investment in use of time.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we'll see you in the great online game.
Thanks, everyone.